So I just 100% completed Sonic Frontiers, and of course I have a lot to say about this game. So in order to 100% this game, I did absolutely everything the game has to offer. This includes completing the main story on hard mode to get the secret final boss, maxing out all of Sonic's stats, completing all the missions for every cyberspace level, completing every side quest and story event by talking to all the characters, collecting all of the egg memos from the fishing minigame, and collecting every single memory token and completely clearing the map. This took forever to do, but it wasn't really that difficult, but just rather time consuming. Anyway, I played pretty much everything the game has to offer, and I generally really liked it. So without further ado, here's my experience with Sonic Frontiers. First, let's talk about the meat and potatoes of Frontiers, the open world. I mean, open zone. And I was honestly very skeptical about the whole open zone thing when the game was first shown off. My main gripe initially was that everything about it just looked out of place. All of the random platforms and rails placed in the sky really threw me off at first, but make no mistake, all of the quote-unquote randomly placed obstacles are intentionally placed to keep the flow going. What I mean by this is when you're grinding on a rail to get a memory token, for example, you are usually put into an easy access point to another rail or platform that has another memory token, so the pace is never really broken. This, in my opinion at least, is just pretty genius level design. On the surface, yeah, it may just look like all of the random obstacles placed in the air were just an afterthought and were just randomly dumped in there after the fact, but that's just not the case at all. This was really my main worry I had with the open zone at first, because I was just generally worried that after collecting a memory token, you would just be booted back to a random area of the map. And while that's definitely the case for some of the mini obstacle challenges, most of them shoot you directly to another one, and the pace is rarely broken. Another main part of the open zone are these simple puzzles that, when completed, fill out more of your map so you can find other things to do within the map, like where memory token and cyberspace locations are, for example. As for the puzzles themselves, they really aren't that great if you ask me. Most of them really just feel like a chore to complete, as they definitely break the speed and pace most of the time. We have puzzles where you have to dash through rings in a certain amount of time, hit balls into loops, a crap load of puzzles that require you to use the Psy-Loop ability in different ways, random Sudoku looking puzzles, and just a lot more that aren't really terrible by any means, but they just aren't that fun either. I wish the puzzles took more inspiration from the series, because these just feel so incredibly bland and uninspired. The puzzles aren't the main part of the open zone gameplay by any means. In fact, they are really completely optional, but I believe that they could have been much better. The open zone gameplay is spread across 3 main islands. Yeah, I say 3 main islands because Ouranos is literally just an extension of Kronos, so yeah. Anyway, we have 3 different environments in the open zone. We have grassy ruins, tropical desert with canyons, and volcanoes and mountains. These are about as generic as things could get when it comes to level environments in any game really, and they kind of just get the job done. But I just wish we got more environments in the end. The game advertises 5 islands, yet one of them is just more Kronos and one of them is just a story event where you have to climb these very tall towers. I truly feel like Ouranos and Kronos were originally one island, because I mean, Ouranos was actually shown in the first trailer for Frontiers. I don't know, man, I just wish instead of getting rehashed islands, we got more unique environments, like maybe a true snow biome or a ruined city, for example, just a little something more Sonic-y. All of the islands were great in their own ways, and I really can't pick a favorite, but Chaos Island can be an absolute headache most of the time. For one, exploration is an absolute chore, as you're constantly accidentally running into boosters and whatnot that send you into one of the obstacle course things. And usually you would just be able to jump off and continue exploring. However, Chaos Island's obstacle courses usually lock the camera to a 2D perspective, meaning you can't just jump off of the rails most of the time. Instead, you have to play through it, then you can continue exploring. This does not sound that bad, but holy crap, dude, it gets so incredibly annoying. Another gripe I have with Chaos Island is that it's really multiple islands that are spread out, meaning in order to access them for the first time, you need to catch a ride on this stupid bird thing that controls like garbage. At least once you get to the island, rails will appear for easier access in the future, but god, this is just not fun. And to top it all off, near the end of the island, you are faced with with this pinball minigame. Now, the criteria for this minigame is just absolutely absurd. You need to get 5 million points to complete the machine, and this was just an absolute migraine factory if I can put it into words. I just never want to play this thing again. But again, the other islands I really had no problems with, but Chaos just had to go and screw everything up. Also, after Chaos Island, you visit Rhea Island, which is basically just a story event as you have to run around to disable 6 towers. This is honestly the point where the game seemed to be losing its consistency. 5 islands are marketed, but the 4th island you visit in the game is just the other part of Kronos Island you couldn't access before. But even then, there's really nothing to do in this island besides disabling the towers. There's no enemies, no bosses, no mini obstacle challenges, and no cyberspace levels. I don't understand why Ouranos, Kronos, and Rhea couldn't have been connected, because it's very obvious they once were the same island. At least things somewhat come full circle at the end of the game, so that's something. As far as Kronos and Ares go, they're fun. They're just really fun. Kronos is really small, but it really only serves as the tutorial world, so it's fine in my opinion. My only nitpick with Ares is that it's pretty difficult to get around the island, but other than that, I really have no other gripes with it. But again, the beginning of Chaos Island was really the main low point of the entire game for me. Once you gain access to all of the mini islands in Chaos, it becomes less of a headache since it becomes easier to get around. Because before gaining easy access to the islands, you had to use this stupid bird skeleton thing, and it was a headache. Another thing that happens in the islands often is that when it turns nighttime, beacons of light will appear with a slot machine. This is called Starfall, and collecting the star bits on the ground will give you a slot machine spin. And, well, to be completely honest, after the first time, it gets very annoying because the slot machine takes up half of the frickin' screen and it never goes away. And the giant beacons of light just get very distracting, especially when you are trying to get to a beacon you place on the map because it blends in with the other beacons of light. Another main issue with the open zone is pop-in. Certain obstacles and objects don't appear until you are right next to them, and this gets so incredibly annoying when trying to pinpoint the locations of memory tokens and puzzles. But in short, I had a blast running around and exploring the open zone. It definitely turned out way better than I initially thought, and that is definitely one of the highlights of Frontiers. Initially, I expected Sonic Frontiers to control somewhat differently from previous games, but the way Sonic controls in this game is a complete 180 from other Boost games. Sonic feels very, and I mean very, smooth to control. Making turns while boosting no longer feels stiff, and that is very beneficial when running around in the open zone. In fact, boosting in Frontiers isn't really boosting anymore. It really only acts as a run button because you go so incredibly slow without using it. In fact, you no longer have a boost gauge, but instead a stamina meter, similar to Breath of the Wild. I can definitely see why they chose to go with this instead, because the boost is your main way of getting around to places very quickly. Other standard moves return in this game as well, like wall jumping, stomping, homing attacking, light dashing, and a lot more. What caught me off guard at first is that, for one, boosting is mapped to the right trigger, mainly due to the other things you can do with Sonic that take up the 4 face buttons. Since double jumping is in Sonic Frontiers, the homing attack is mapped to the square button, but you don't have to jump to activate it. This is mainly because the square button is not only the homing attack button, but is also your standard attack button during combat. The light dash is also mapped to the left stick instead of triangle, and this is definitely just took a while to get used to, but it all works out for the better for the reasons we'll get into in just a second. They also added the drop dash from Sonic Mania. Using this move in 3D is kind of fun, but I didn't really find myself using it too often. It's just much easier to use the normal boost. But something I noticed with all of Sonic's standard moves is that they feel very stiff and unresponsive at times. Even quick stepping feels off in this game for just no apparent reason. Another main aspect of Frontiers is the combat system, and dude, this was just so much fun. Frontiers gives Sonic access to a skill tree where you can unlock different moves for Sonic. The first move you unlock is the Psyloop ability, which is by far the most essential move in Frontiers, because it is not only used for combat, it is also used for several puzzles and collecting items. Holding down the triangle button while running will put a blue trail behind Sonic, and making a circle with the trail can deal damage to enemies, collect memory tokens and other items, and can help solve those mini puzzle challenges we were talking about earlier. Basically, if you don't know what to do in a certain situation, Psylooping is probably the solution, and I think this is a very fun mechanic to use, but just not so ideal in combat. Other combat moves you unlock throughout the game are just so fun to pull off, and using multiple moves and chaining them together is just such a satisfying sight to see. But as you unlock more moves and level up your stats, combat becomes a breeze for most mini bosses, as you only have to hold down one button to pull off a move that does serious amounts of damage. Speaking of bosses, throughout the islands you can encounter normal enemies and a variety of mini bosses that each require certain mechanics to defeat them. And I'm not going to talk about each mini boss individually because we would be here all day, but they are all mostly distinctive of one another, and they are all pretty fun. My favorite mini boss is definitely Asura, one of the first ones you encounter in the game, just because of how massive this thing is and what you need to do to defeat it. My least favorite favorite mini-boss, however, is definitely Shark, which you find in Ares Island, because in order to deal damage, you need to go through this very long quick time event portion. And if you don't deal enough damage in the window that you get, then you have to do the whole quick time event segment again, and this was just an absolute chore. So I didn't really bother defeating this thing more than once. Most of the other guardians you encounter are pretty fun. There are just some that make you want to rip your hair out at times. But my favorite part of Frontiers by far are the supersonic Titan boss fights. This is hands down the best gameplay Sonic has ever had. These are just actual masterpieces. The combat, the music, the choreography, everything is just perfect. Not to mention how cool the Titans actually look. These boss fights truly made me feel like Sonic was still cool, and dude, I just wish there was a way to replay them without starting a new save file, because these are truly amazing. But in short, the combat in Sonic Frontiers was definitely a pleasant surprise. What once looked like a janky, broken mess in earlier footage turned out to be really freaking fun. I would say this is definitely a step up from the Werehog gameplay in Sonic Unleashed, due to just how fast-paced and satisfying it is in Frontiers. Another main portion of Sonic Frontiers lies in the cyberspace levels, which are mini-linear stages that you find throughout the open world that play similarly to previous Boost Sonic games. And I'm going to be completely honest when I say that while I still generally had fun playing these, most of them are really not that fun, and that's mostly due to how Sonic handles in the stages. Cyberspace is kinda weird because Sonic's speed is locked to a certain level, and none of your upgrades or combat moves translate into cyberspace, so you can only use the homing attack to defeat enemies. But the main issue is that the way Sonic controls in this game is obviously not meant to be used in linear stages, because man, these feel so weird to play. I cannot tell you how many times I accidentally fell off of a stage because turning in cyberspace is an absolute nightmare without a dedicated drift button. A lot of things about Sonic's moveset actually make cyberspace worse. For example, the boost. Since the boost acts more like a run button in Frontiers, it no longer lets you just plow through enemies, so you have to stop to homing attack them, and there's a very weird delay with the homing attack in this game already, so it just slows everything down. And Sonic is just not very fast in cyberspace, regardless of how much you use the boost. This is especially noticeable in 2D, as it feels so weird because Sonic moves so incredibly slow. It also feels very awkward to do any sort of platforming because Sonic feels almost magnetized to the surface, and this isn't only an issue in cyberspace, but it's definitely most noticeable here. And I might as well just address the elephant in the room. Yeah, most if not every cyberspace level has reused level design from a previous Sonic game, whether that would be Generations, Unleashed, or even the adventure games. There's nothing new here. Honestly, I don't really mind it. I still had a blast going through these levels regardless if they felt familiar or not. The ones that were ripped from Sonic Adventure were especially fun because we could play them with an entirely new form of Sonic gameplay, so it was really cool seeing those levels in a new light. But as far as everything else goes, it's alright, I guess. What kind of disappointed me is that there are only 4 cyberspace environments throughout the whole game, those being Green Hill, Chemical Plant, Sky Sanctuary, and the Metropolis City Zone. This kinda sucks, yeah, but it's not the end of the world, although I do wish there was a bit more variety because after a while, the cyberspace levels all start feeling the same. I wish instead of just one unique environment being the city, if you can even call it unique, I wish all of the environments were unique. But I know the whole Sonic's memory thing probably prevented them from doing that, but even then, I wish we got more environments than just the same ones we've been seeing in every Sonic game for the past decade. Why not rip some from a Sonic Unleashed, Sonic Adventure, or even Sonic 06? I don't see why we have to play through Green Hill and Chemical Plant over and over again. It just sucks that cyberspace wasn't fully realized because it's literally a digital dimension. This could have been the coolest part of Frontiers. Cyberspace isn't all that bad though because there were definitely some surprises. One of the levels actually gives you the drift mechanic to play through a recreation of Savannah Citadel Act 2 from Sonic Unleashed. Unfortunately, it controls like garbage, but I appreciate the attempt at adding a fan favorite feature. Some of the cyberspace levels also add a skateboard for Sonic to ride on, and yeah, this is really cool. But overall, cyberspace just ended up kinda being a mixed bag, which really sucks because back when it was first leaked, the playtesters were making it out to be the best level design in the series, but I guess there's always next game. Each island also has one cyberspace portal that leads to a fishing spot where you can play a fishing minigame with Big the Cat. And while yeah, the minigame is super easy especially compared to the fishing in Sonic Adventure, it's very relaxing, fun even, and is an easy way to buy Cocos and seeds to level up your stats. But overall, I think this is a very nice addition to Frontiers, and seeing Big the Cat in a mainline Sonic game again is just really cool. But if there's one thing that cyberspace gets right, then it's definitely the music. In fact, the entirety of Sonic Frontiers has one of the best soundtracks in the entire series, if you ask me. There is just so much variety in this game's soundtrack, but let's start off with the cyberspace stuff. The cyberspace soundtrack is basically what the Forces OST should have been. I feel like the EDM sort of synth style of music is perfective in the Frontier's cyberspace levels, because it actually sounds good and it doesn't make my ears bleed. Cyberspace also has some vocal themes, and they really remind me of the Avatar stages from Forces, but again, I believe it is perfected here. The cyberspace levels being a reference to Sonic's past also reflects in the music. I get vibes from Sonic R, Sonic Adventure, and even Sonic Rush from some of these tracks, and it's just great. The soundtrack for the open zone is also just fantastic. I really love how the music gets more dynamic and upbeat as you progress through the story, and it's just wild how there's 7 different tracks for each island. And on top of that, the first 3 islands each all have distinct music genres from one another, again adding on to the variety of this game's soundtrack. I think my favorite island OST has to be Ouranos Island though. There's only one track, but it really captures the situation and current point in the story, which we'll get into in just a minute. But we can't forget the boss fights. Oh my god, dude. The Guardian boss fights all have music that just fits so well, I can't really describe it. My favorite boss tracks are either Asura or Spider, because Asura's boss theme is very suspenseful and really captures the size of this thing. I really like the Spider fight music because it just reminds me of Egg Dragoon from Sonic Unleashed with all the trumpets and stuff. And we also get to hear some lo-fi music to accompany the fishing minigame, again adding on to the whole relaxation part of that minigame. But the highlight of Sonic Frontier's soundtrack lies within the Titan fights. I don't even know what to say, man. They just absolutely killed it. With the help of Kellen Quinn from Sleeping with Sirens and Tyler Smith from Danger Kids, who also worked on Infinite Theme and Sonic Forces, we have probably the best Sonic boss music in the entire series. The heavy emo metal is just so hype when beating the living hell out of these things as Super Sonic, and this was truly the highlight of Frontiers, man. The music complements the hype of the boss fight so well, it truly feels like they knew where they wanted to go with this soundtrack. Along with the Titan fights, we also have a number of ending themes. Dear Father is the first one we hear, and it gives off the same vibe as Dear My Friend from Sonic Unleashed. It's not necessarily a great theme, but it's kinda sad because it connects with the ending of the game, which we'll get into soon, trust me. We also have Vandalize, which doesn't even feel like a Sonic theme, but I don't care because it freaking slaps. Next we have One Way Dream by Nate Wants to Battle. And before I talk about the song itself, I just wanted to say that I love Nate's inclusion in this game because he's an actual Sonic fan. Anyway, the song itself is really good. It's a good upbeat ending to the game, even if the ending wasn't that great, which again, we'll get into in just a second, trust me. Also, Tomoyo Otani stated that One Way Dream is a hidden message from Sonic Team. The song basically talks about learning from your mistakes and making something better from them, and that's really what Frontiers is in relation to the previous Sonic game, Sonic Forces, which everyone didn't really enjoy. And then we have the game's main theme, I'm Here, and in comparison to the other boss themes, yeah, this isn't really that great. I think one of the main reasons why the final Titan boss felt underwhelming was because of this theme, because it just doesn't hit the same as the other bosses. But overall, the soundtrack is freaking amazing in this game. Definitely some of the best in the series. So, I guess we might as well talk about the story now. And man, it's such an improvement from the stories we've gotten from the past decade. So basically, while looking for the Chaos Emerald, Sonic and his friends get stuck in cyberspace, which is the digital dimension we talked about before. However, Sonic was able to break free from cyberspace due to his determination or whatever. He lands on the Starfall Islands, where all of his friends are trapped. On the islands, he runs into Sage, which is Eggman's newest creation, who is meant to harness the power of the Ancients and take control of their technology. Sage traps Sonic's friends between cyberspace and the real world, meaning Sonic has to save his friends while stopping all the Titans that Sage uses to try to stop Sonic. So basically how progression works in this game is that you need to collect memory tokens to save your friends, then you need to go defeat Guardians and Minibosses to collect portal gears, then you need to use the portal gears to go into cyberspace levels, then you need to collect Valkyries from completing the cyberspace levels, which lets you unlock Chaos Emeralds, and once you collect all of the emeralds, then you fight the Titan boss at the end and move on to the next island. I mean, it's kinda confusing, but it's pretty straightforward, and this is basically how it is throughout the whole game, with them occasionally throwing in a unique objective like completing the Pinball game, for example. But the story itself is actually probably one of the most well-written Sonic narratives ever. While the plot itself is relatively simple, the character development in this game is just top-notch. Amy, for example, instead of just being obsessed with Sonic all the time, she's actually a down-to-earth character who just wants to go see the world or whatever. Knuckles, instead of being a stupid goofball, he actually wants to honor his tribe's legacy and protect the Master Emerald, as we can see this in the prologue animation as well. And then we have Tails, who wants to be his own hero without living in Sonic's shadow. Like, yeah, this is the same Tails from Forces who was helpless against Infinite or Chaos. In fact, Tails himself actually actually calls back to that moment from Forces to prove that he is just a burden to Sonic and he wants to improve from that. So not only is the writing in Frontiers giving characters solid personalities, but it is also fixing past writing mistakes and is using them for character development. Like, what is actually going on here? Is this even the same series anymore? Sonic even brings up how Tails is not a burden to him, and he even mentions how Tails saved Station Square back in Sonic Adventure 1, how he saved Sonic from the Deadly Six in Lost World. Like, what? Is there actually continuity in this series now? Hell, Amy even mentioned Styx at the end of the game, and I was just shocked. I couldn't even grasp what the ending was. But one of the best characters in Frontiers is Sage, who is not just some cliche evil villain like Infinite. She actually grows an emotional attachment to Eggman, seeing him as a father figure, especially after seeing Sonic interact with his friends so much. In fact, Eggman actually ends up feeling the same way, seeing Sage as a daughter to him. Yeah, like, what is going on here? Eggman is no longer some evil scientist who just wants to take over the world. He actually has human emotion. I honestly don't know how they could treat Eggman as a villain going forward in this series, because his character in Frontiers is just absolutely outstanding. Sage is definitely the best villain we've had since Mephiles, because at first she's just some AI that is under the influence of her master, but as she interacts with Sonic more and more, she gains more emotion and eventually sacrificing herself to save everyone. And I'm not really going to get into the lore of Frontier story and the ancients and the Cocos and all of that, because I'm just as confused as everybody else was after playing this game. But apparently the Chaos Emeralds came from space and the ancients used them to power their titans, which they used against some evil. I don't know. The lore isn't fully explained or fleshed out to us at all, but I guess we might as well talk about the ending of the game. Okay, so after defeating the final titan fight, the true villain is revealed to be the AI that's been guiding us throughout the whole game, which is just a giant rock in space. So Sage and Sonic, with the possession of the titan Sonic just defeated, go to fight the thing in space. Now, this is going to be the coolest boss fight ever, right? No, not at all. Instead, we get a glorified version of the hacking minigame we played a couple of times during Chaos Island. What happened here? The ending of this game as a whole honestly felt rushed out the door, if I'm being completely honest. Throughout the game, Sonic gets slowly taken over by the cyber corruption, and I really thought this was alluding to a completely new form for the final fight. But instead, during our journey through Wea Island, the problem just gets fixed just like that through the power of friendship. So the whole conflict of Sonic getting taken over by cyber corruption just gets completely thrown out the door, and I was very disappointed when this happened. And the true final boss itself just feels so shoehorned in to give more story. The AI lady talks to us throughout the whole fight, saying things like, "I saw as you ran through my prison," and just a lot of other cryptic dialogue, which I feel like is their way of tying up loose ends of the story that they couldn't do anywhere else. But in short, the ending of this game just felt rushed. The final cutscenes of the game are pretty good, as Sonic and friends just fly into the distance. That's all fine and dandy, but the story that the game set up from the start just doesn't really get resolved in a satisfying way, unfortunately, and that really sucks, because the build up to the big finale was so great just for it to be a shoot 'em up minigame. It would have been so much cooler if we got a new Cyber Sonic form and an actual good final boss that had One Way Dream playing in the background that's not just a minigame, because the other Titan bosses were super fun. So is it really wrong of me to expect more from the final fight? I don't know, man. Frontier's just left with a bittersweet ending, that's all. It really shows that after Chaos Island, things were just rushed. Kronos Island was actually split into 3 islands to fill up the huge content gap at the end of the game. So yeah, there was actually going to be a completely unique 4th island to tie everything together, and I'm not saying Ouranos is bad by any means, it just doesn't belong at the end of the game. Anyway, after defeating the true enemy, Sonic and his friends fly off in the distance and give their final goodbyes to each other before they all go their separate ways, with a cliffhanger cutscene of Eggman reviving Sage through AI. And that, my friends, is Sonic Frontiers. What a game, man. Despite having a bittersweet ending to the game as a whole was truly a fun experience. The open zone gameplay is just fun, and it's a blast to just run around the islands. The writing and the story also made me truly interested in seeing what was going to happen next, even if it fell short near the end. This game was just much needed for the Sonic franchise, because I truly believe this is the best Sonic game since Colors. It definitely has a lot of room for improvement though, but it serves as a good stepping stone for the next mainline Sonic game. So I would give this game a solid 8 out of 10. If there was a little more development time to make a fully realized ending to the game, then this might be just one of the best Sonic games ever made. But it is what it is, and this is still one of the best Sonic games in years. So that was my review of Sonic Frontiers. This video took a very long time to make, so I really hope you all enjoyed. But that's going to end it off for today's video, so let me know what you guys think about Sonic Frontiers in the comment section down below. But anyway, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all later. Goodbye.